1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, tape number 3. Collins talking, and we're going to pick up at, I guess, page 11, item 39 or thereabouts. Workloads, rest periods, activity timelines, passive thermal control, preparation and updating for LOI. Does anybody have anything to say about those?
Hang on a minute. I'd just like to review these couple of pages before we get up to LOI. With respect to preparation for LOI, our flight plan was written in such a way that it depended on doing mid-course 4 and an option 1 P52 followed to get the landing site refs mat into the computer, and then an option 3 refs mat P52. Then
is that before mid-course correction 4?
Yeah, mid-course 4 was the landing site rest.
Yeah.
And then our simulation of LOI, where we checked the gimbal motors, then a 360-degree pitch maneuver to look at the moon, and then a preparation for LOI. The mid-course 4 was canceled, and consequently we didn't do the option 1 P52 that established our new refs mat and all set up the computer for the LOI. So when we got around to the P52 in the flight plan, which occurred at about 73 hours, we did option 3 just like it said in the flight plan, and then recognized that we had never done a new P52 to an option 1. But I'm not even sure that we could at that point in time, because
they hadn't uplinked this.
I'm not sure they had uplinked the necessary data into the computer. So. In any case, we recognized that we weren't quite operating the way the flight plan had intended due to this cancellation of mid-course 4. And we got about the business of getting that information from the ground and doing a P52 option 1, and then a P52 option 3, and then our simulation of the LOI, where we brought the gimbal motors on and checked that everything really was copacetic. In that process, we got behind the timeline as a consequence of doing things differently than we had intended on the flight plan, and consequently we canceled the 360-degree pitch maneuver to photograph the moon. We didn't feel very bad about that, since shortly before, when we went into the moon shadow, we did look at it extensively through the windows and take a lot of pictures with the high-speed black and white. So I think we really had accomplished what we wanted to do in looking at the moon from a relatively close range, and we agreed to cancel the 360, and we were then in fact back slightly ahead of the timeline in preparation for LOI 1. We probably spend a little more time in discussing that among ourselves than actually we had planned on, though, since it was different than our simulations. And that's probably
There was something else. Was it just the two different alignments that got us a little bit behind?
I think it was not having a rest mount.
well, there may have been something else there. I don't recall right now what it might have been. We did that secondary
Did it have to do with the
secondary loop check, I recall.
No, that was
that
Secondary
radio
radio flow check.
We couldn't see the star for the star check at a certain time.
yeah, that might have been it. Or we were sitting around on one foot and then the other waiting for something. There was a time in the pad, you know, star check was only valid after 1 past the hour or something like that.
Yeah. That occurred at some time. I don't see that written down here on that particular pad.
Might mention on the Sextant star checks that on most occasions, not all, but on most occasions, we manually drove the optics CDUs to the ground computed values for the star and checked the attitude in that manner, and that always worked for us. We always were able to see the star in the sextant field of view by manually driving the optics rather than using the computer to designate the optics. And then I guess we're up to LOI.
Yeah.
LOI was on time, and residuals were very low. Again, we saw a large value of delta V sub C, 6.8. And Buzz might want to comment on the pugs.
We've been briefed before on the experiences that Paul Tennant had with the operation of the Pugs oxidizer flow valve, whereby they had responded to the initial decrease that the system gave them by placing a switch decrease. And then subsequently it went to increase and they followed it, but were never able to catch up with it. So it had been suggested to us as the best procedure to monitor this, of course, in the first 25 seconds, and again to expect that it would be in decrease, and to expect that maybe even by going to full increase you could not keep up with the system. So with this in mind, I watched it throughout the burn, and as soon as it started up toward the minus 100, and when it was around minus 120, and I was convinced that it was in the upward swing toward increase, why I threw it to full increase, well ahead of what the normal ground rules would say. And sure enough, the valve went to max, and despite the fact that it was in increase, why the needle eventually went on up into the increased position. I don't think it got over 100. But at the end of the burn, we were, what, 3/4 tenths behind?
Mm-hmm.
So even by leading it as much as we did, I still ended up being a little bit behind. But that was pretty small in comparison to what it could have been.
About the burn itself,
LOI was just about nominal. What did I think the
Burn
voice
time was
the
a little
voice
off.
tape? Yeah.
What's the pad value for burn time, please?
6:02.
And the burn time was 5:57. So it was 5 seconds. So.
Yeah, but fairly early in the burn, we could
You
tell.
guys were predicting that. I can remember that.
A couple of 3 to 4 seconds early is what we predicted.
Start transient was very small, and the steering was extremely quiet and accurate. And the chamber pressure, which we noticed to be a little bit low on the first SPS burn, slowly climbed on up, and it actually ended up to burn slightly over 100. And I put some specific comments on the voice tape, which we can get from the transcript of the voice tape, but in summary, I thought it was a very nominal burn.
Then post-burn noun 44, we're at 60.9 mile perigee and 169.9 avalanche.
The LOS that we used in addition to star checks and so forth to tell us that we were in the right position relative to the moon and the Earth, which, like the horizon check, is an additional cross-check, double-check, whatever you want to call it, on the calculations made by the ground, turned out to be within a second of the predicted time that the ground had. When they said you're going to lose signal at 75, 41, 23, why, it was a second after that why that signal strength dropped on down. It was very comforting.
And the horizon check also was good, as I remember.
Yep.
Yeah, we could see the horizon coming up a good bit before. Let's see, I guess it was the one for TEI that was a little confusing as to which
way we were pointed.
You were the only one.
Okay.
Now, before the burn, I had noticed a difference in the A and B N2s. I didn't record which one was a little higher. They were well within what I guess we consider nominal, but it stuck in my mind that there was a difference. So it wasn't too surprising when the ground called us after the burn and said that they had observed tank B nitrogen as having dropped down somewhat during the time of the burn. I think it dropped to 1900, something like that.
Values I have are B was 1950 and A was 2250 post-burn, and the helium was 1500 psi. And that came up, those values came up a little bit after the temperature stabilized.
We'll probably hear more about that one but, it wasn't any, evidently it wasn't any particular leak, might have been just a thermal condition that one tank had been exposed to.
Yeah, I don't know
The
what it
flow
was.
through that particular solenoid valve, I guess, could have been greater, the orifice size or something in there.
Well, let's see, we started that one on which system?
B.
We started that one on B, and then went to A. I don't know whether that would have any explanation.
I couldn't think offhand
Wouldn't think
that
it
would have
would, no.
affected. The only thing you'd think about was this size of the orifice through which the gas was passing into there, or the chamber size that somehow it was feeding.
Well, I don't think we were ever really concerned that we had a problem on the B side. And
No.
we were glad the ground was looking at it, but it seemed to us to be all right.
Yeah, that was the only concern they had, I felt quite satisfied.
And then post LOI, we did a missing contact on time and did a P52 option 3 and a drift check. Those numbers were reported. And LOI 2 then was a bank A only burn, I assume to conserve nitrogen pressure in the B side. 17-second burn, and residuals were reasonable, 3.30 and 0.1, and the delta VC again was 5.2. Post-burn down 44 was 54.4 by 66.1.
Did you want to talk about that orbit being targeted 55, 65 rather than 60 circling?
Yeah, probably deserves a flag.
Well, I think that we made it clear on a number of occasions pre-flight that we were not in agreement with the change very soon before flight to the 55-65 orbit. Not that we didn't agree with the intent of what they were trying to achieve, it's just that it had the benefit of its effect on a number of other areas of the flight plan. And I guess I still feel as though that was somewhat of a mistake. At least there were some other sides to the discussion that hadn't been fully reviewed by all parties.
Let's see, how about between the two maneuvers? One item that came up was the request to look at the crater Aristarchus, to see if we could see any glow or any evidence at all of some observations that I guess had been made by people on the ground. And that does bring to mind, as we were coming in on LOI and could see the edge of the moon coming back into daylight. It appeared to me at one point, I can't identify where it was, that there was along the horizon one particular area that was lit up. I doubt that it was anywhere near Aristarchus, but
there appeared to be one region that was a little unusual in its lighting. And maybe our films will catch that. We'll just have to look and maybe try and identify that when we see the pictures. I don't think there's any particular connection, but I thought I'd mention it because that did strike me as a little unusual.
Well, as long as we're talking about Aristarchus, I've got to agree with Buzz's observation that the brightest part of the area that was somewhat illuminated very well might agree with the zero phase point of earthshine, which would just mean that you were getting a lot of local reflection back from earthshine. That's certainly...
You're talking about once we were in lunar orbit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would certainly agree with particularly the highly illuminated parts of the inside of the crater walls. However, I think it was also true that the area around Aristarchus, that is in the plains, was also more illuminated.
It wasn't just the crater, the whole general area.
So more illuminated, and it's not necessarily obvious that also would happen to agree with the zero phase point of earthshine. It could.
Well, we had
not.
nothing to compare it with, really, because
Yeah.
this was not in sunlight, it was in earthshine. And that wouldn't have been zero.
I doubt that it
We couldn't
would
have
have
been our
known.
zero phase from the Earth. And
offhand, it doesn't agree with any
Yeah.
particular thing that I can think of, and it seemed to extend for a fairly good-sized distance around that area. That happened to be true. And although I called that a fluorescence, it's probably not a very good term, because it certainly didn't have any colors that I could associate with. It was just a local higher illumination level over the surface in that point.
well, it obviously stood out more than anything else that we could see on in either direction as being a brighter area. I don't know if you could compare that with any of the brighter areas we saw in the sunlit portion, say in the backside. It didn't look like it was the same thing at all.
No,
With not having anything to compare it with in the way of earthshine illumination, we really couldn't draw much.
the only thing we could say that the effect was there, or its cause, we couldn't very well identify, but the effect was there, and it was a very pronounced effect. It's a more obvious effect, say, than looking at the Earth orbital, the illumination in the ecliptic zodiacal light. It's a more pronounced effect than the zodiacal light, which is also observable pretty easily with the eye. Our post LOI 2 P52 option 3 was a good one, and had extremely low torquing angles. That was torqued at 8105. And after this, we prepared the tunnel for LEM ingress.
Back to the first time we went into darkness on the front side. We're in the higher orbit before LOI 2. Going into darkness, this was before we got to the region of the landing site, or it wasn't illuminated at that point. I guess it's a question of your eyes being light adapted to the lighter things that you're looking at that are in sunlight. The contrast in going into the Terminator was very vivid in that there was just nothing to be seen, yet you would wait a short while and then you'd pick up earthshine and you could see quite well as soon as the sunlit portion of the moon disappeared and your eyes could get it dark adapted, where we could start looking at things like Aristarchus. But certainly there was as much earthshine on the dark side of the Terminator as there was later on, but your eyes just could not accommodate to that, and it was just pitch black. But after a short while, you could then begin to pick up what I would think would be fairly reasonable lighting coming from the Earth. What you'd relate that to, whether you'd say that that's at all adequate for any landing operations, I doubt that, but it certainly did enable you to make observations. Is that about the way you saw it?
I think I'd agree.
We didn't do an extensive amount of observing in earthshine.
I thought it was about 5 to 10 minutes really past the Terminator before I was really observing things in earthshine very well and being adapted. But however, if you had been adapted, you'd probably start to see things relatively quickly after
It seemed to me
passing the spacecraft into darkness.
we did use a number, I don't know how accurate it was at all, of relating that to a full moon. The number that somebody used, one of the two of you, I think, 4 or 5 times as bright as moon shine on the Earth.
I don't remember making a comparison. It was done in previous flights, and some of the people on previous flights indicated they thought it might be conceivable to make land descents into earthshine or something. I don't guess I'd be willing to go that far yet. Looked to me like the amount of detail that you could pick up, at least from orbital altitude, wasn't consistent with what you really need to be able to pick out to be able to do a descent.
Well, but you might do things like telescope tracking or even sextant tracking.
Yeah.
You could probably pick out fairly characteristic features in the sextant, though we didn't try and do that.
It's difficult to pick out things very easily in earthshine, though, unless it's a very pronounced feature like Copernicus or Kepler or some of the bigger craters. You can see those well out ahead and track them continually. But for smaller features that aren't well identified with giant size features in the close proximity, I don't think you'd be able to pick them up. Okay, we are ready for the second hatch removal here. Now, perhaps we might talk for a second about our hatch stowage and probe and drill stowage. You talk about
Well, the hatch we stowed in a conventional place, that is the hatch stowage bag underneath the left-hand couch. And that was an easy and convenient place to stow it. Ever since they enlarged that bag, it fit very well and was out of the way. The probe we stowed, as per one of the previous flight suggestion, under the right-hand couch with the nose of the probe in the plus Y direction, and it's strapped underneath the foot of the right-hand couch with the 2 straps which were specifically designed for stowage. The drogue, again, as per one of the previous flights, we just stuffed in between the LEB and the probe held it in place with a couple of general purpose straps. That's about all I have to say about that. It was, we did nothing that we invented, it was just storage we inherited, and it seems to work well. What'd you?
I was really thinking about looking ahead here and about our overall LEM storage. We did one thing that was different than our pre-flight plan with respect to leaving the probe and drove stowed in the command module overnight.
After LOI too.
Subsequent to this time.
Yeah.
Oh, after LOI 2, we put the,
Was between the second LEM ingress and between LOI day LEM ingress and DOI day LEM ingress, we didn't restow the probe and drove.
no, we left them in the command module. Again, in the spots which I mentioned, and that seemed to work well.
That's probably debatable. It certainly seemed at the time that all the pluses seemed to be in favor of doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't think it was a big thing. We just tried to save time at the start of DOI day by not having to get hung up in the tunnel at all. We had it already removed and it was stowed, and that meant that on one night we had to arrange a sleep configuration with the probe and drogue stowed in the command module.
Which wasn't a problem, who slept over there?
I did. It wasn't the most desirable. It was a little cramped underneath the right seat with the probe and drogue in there. I was able to sneak in through underneath it, and I think I made one exit out over the top of the seat, at the hatch end of the seat. I guess the only thing that leaves you a little bit open to having the probe and the drogue in the command module if you've got to separate from the LEM for any reason.
Well, that would have been all right too, if you accommodated that during that.
Okay, this is the point where you do your LOI day landmark, right?
In our activation checklist, we have the CSM to LEM transfer list, and we reviewed this over and added a few things to it and put some notes on it. I think it would behoove follow-on crews to pay close attention to this type of a list, especially if they do use the ingress into the LEM Lunar. To record anything that's brought back into the command module from the LEM. We brought the purse back in with us, the transfer, I guess we call it the transfer storage assembly. And that, along with one bag, transfer bag, was used to keep track of everything that was going to be going in the next day. We elected to take a few snacks in with us. We added tissues to the transfer list because, in thinking about it, I don't believe we had any tissues in the LEM.
There were, but we couldn't recall where they were.
Well, I still don't recall where they were. We had towels, a couple of towels. But you certainly do need the tissues. We found that out the first day when we went in Translunar, and I don't think we mentioned this, when we pulled the window shades down, the windows were covered with moisture, and in order to get any
pictures out to test the cameras, why we had to bring in some tissues and wipe the windows off. And we found considerable use for the 2 packs of tissues that we took on in. I think that's something that ought to be added to the LEM stowage.
It's probably worth mentioning at that point that due to various attitude constraints and sun positions and so on, you find yourself putting those window blinds up and down fairly frequently in lunar orbit on the LEM windows. And when you put them up, you're going to start to collect moisture on those windows in some attitudes. And so invariably, when you take the window shades down, you have partially degraded windows.
It took a long time. You couldn't just wipe it off once because it formed right up again because the glass had cooled off so much.
So there was it would, in fact, clear if you left it exposed to the sunlight for a significant period of time, but you didn't always have that much time before you had to be tracking or looking at the ground or doing something. So having the tissues there or towels or something to dry those windows off so that you could use them as windows was important.
Another item that we added to the transfer list, and we asked for approval from the ground for this, was the monocular. We thought we could make more use of that in the LEM than Mike could in the command modules. So we took that on in with us, and we did make certain use of it on the surface, looking at and observing certain rocks before the EVA and after the EVA. And I certainly would recommend crews having something like that on board the LEM in the way of a magnifying device.
So useful also pre-EVA and helping you plan your EVA routes and objects of interest.
I might mention that when we went in there the first day, I did go over the circuit breaker checklist that we were going to do on LOI day, and also went over the complete switch checklist. So in essence, we got ourselves one day ahead. On LOI day, I went over the circuit breakers again, and didn't go through the complete switch list again. But that gave us a little bit more time to devote to the rather brief COM procedures that we had. I might mention here that the systems test meter in the command module that shows LEM power position was always within limits. It did oscillate rather rapidly between about 0.3, 0.4, and about 2 something volts. Generally around 1.2, but the cycling on and off of the LEM loads was much more rapid than I had anticipated.
Every few seconds, the voltage level of the LEM bus would change significantly. You still read us okay?
Somebody's giving us a message. Let's see, are we still on the debriefing guide? I'm liable to deviate.
We're at item 30. 31, right around in there.
I have logged the times of transfer to LEM power, 83 hours even, and transfer back to CSM power at 83:38. And the
intervening time was spent checking out the comm. All of this was done on low voltage taps. We checked the OPS pressures the first day and the second day, Translunar day and LOI day, and they were well up there, 5750, 5800. The repress valve certainly does make a loud bang when you move it to close or to repress, and there doesn't seem to be any way to avoid that. Especially when you go to close, you're relieving some pressure, it seems. When you go to repress, it's possible by being very very deliberate in opening it that you could avoid it. I wasn't able to do it at any of the times that I activated it. And the comm seemed to be very loud and clear. I guess that's about it for the LOI day activation.
Okay, I guess just about this same time, we had a P22, our first P22, and comment on that.
It went normal. I have on my map the location of the crater, which I marked on. And I'll give that to the appropriate people, but in general, all the procedures and the update, the map, the acquisition, everything was completely nominal. I don't have any comments.
I'm not sure whether it was this pass or maybe the one before that. You were back in the command module and we had a good view coming up on the landing site. Wasn't this on LOI day? I'm sure it must have been because we were too busy to be gazing out the window on DOI day. But I guess what I'd recommend is maybe both LEM crew members being in the LEM on LOI day, because it just so happened that the attitude, even though you thought you had a good view, I was convinced I had a much better one than you did. Right out the window of the approach. So I think both crew members probably ought to be in the LEM during that time. Let's see, did we mention anything about roll calibration anywhere?
No, we skipped that.
2.0 degrees, and we mentioned it somewhere back when.
We called it 2.05, I believe, and it was difficult to tell. 2.04 might have been better. 205 is the number we used, and it never changed until undocking. Okay,
Consumables. Because of transposition and docking and because of P23, we started up behind on RCS, and we stayed slightly behind on RCS. The other consumables, oxygen and hydrogen, were within the scatter. Well, so was RCS, really, we were way behind. That's about all I say about consumables. Well, they may be talking about 11 consumables.
No, I don't think so.
Final term. I think that's all we have in section 7. Anybody else think of any other items for section 7? Through LOI day activation?
Well, let's see, I guess we went to bed just about on the flight plan. How many hours did we have scheduled?
We had a 9-hour rest period scheduled starting at 85 hours.
And I think again, the reason that we were able to be in position to be able to take advantage of the rest period at the beginning of it was because we'd already faced some of the LEM problems in Translunar Coast. Not the problems, but we at least gotten used to the LEM operation.
That's, I guess we knew all along that that could be the problem on our timeline, just as it could have been on 10. Anytime you get hung up in that DOI day on LEM systems, why you're not going to make it. And so we had that same strong inclination to try to be ahead and try to understand the LEM as best we could before that time period. Okay, we're in, shall we go right ahead with section 8? Is that, this gets into LEM checkout here. Let's first go through the command module sections here. Why don't you take a hack at that?
Okay, CSM power transfer. Best I can recall, that went without incident. Prior to this time, of course, the CSM had been providing power to the LEM heaters, and you could watch the load cycle as the heaters cut in and out on the service meters. As far as I know, they were always within limits. I think 11 amps is supposed to be the max, and I don't think we ever went over 2/3 of that, probably.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile to point out that we didn't jump ahead of the timeline any, as far as I know, and waking time to try and get a leg up on it. I think we felt confident that the 1 hour or whatever it is, it was more than that, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of
Was
time.
allowed, would let us not have to do things like putting on the LCGs and things like that the day before.
It's 2 hours we had before you went in from wake up. But I think it's probably worth mentioning too that looking back now, none of us got nearly as good a night of sleep that night as we had the previous nights, and I'm sure it was just that the pressure was beginning to build at this point, coming up on DOI day, and we got 5 to 6 hours that night. I guess I would have expected that. I think it's predictable.
Okay, you looking for something there, Buzz?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, updates. They update us with the fact that A1 was 500 feet above the landing site. That didn't seem to turn anybody on because the LEM charts aren't that accurate. IMU realign we did. S-band worked okay. Oh, this is S-band. It says under command module, but it must be S-band LEM. S-band activation. Page 14. Well, anyway, I assisted the LEM with VHF checks. They worked fine. The tunnel closeout went normally. The probe, grog, and hatch, God bless it, all that stuff worked flawlessly. We maneuvered for landmark tracking. Acquired misspin, photo prep. Nothing of this is worth special comments. Yeah. At this time I was on this solo book, and the solo book worked well. I was going through it and checking things off item by item. The undocking went normally. Now, Neil, you may want to say some things about that undocking and the station keeping in regard to who was going to trust and how it worked out and what it did to our state vectors and whatnot. Now, you want to talk about
Yeah, we
that?
want to go back and review some lemon activities.
Well, you got a whole thing coming up.
Okay.
Let's go back here for a second to the tunnel closeout.
Okay.
Because as I remember, you were clicking along in good shape there, but we were well ahead over in the limb at that point in time, so we were in effect waiting on CMP to get this whole long series of things done that was concluded by clearing the tunnel and getting that ready for us to go. This is a time period when the LEM and command module activities are interrelated and dependent on each other, and you have to do things in particular orders and be careful that you don't get out of sequence here. And so I think that that was the first place where we just kind of had to sit still and wait until...
But it did go according to schedule.
It did.
According to my
It
schedule.
did.
It went right along like it should have. There isn't much you can do to hurry that probe and drogue stuff. I think all the stuff I did up in that tunnel I did very slowly and deliberately and as per the checklist.
Okay, now there was the next thing was to maneuver to the tracking attitude, which you had to do after getting the tunnel all set up to do the P22. And
Well, see, the hooker was, I couldn't do that until the tunnel had vented down to a certain pressure level, because there's a constraint on 2-jet roll, 4-jet roll, and no jet roll, depending on the condition of the tunnel. So that may have been when you were just sitting there waiting. I don't really recall, but see, I had to inhibit roll commands until LEM-CM delta P was greater than 3.5, and then I had 2-jet roll authority, and that was when I started maneuvering the track attitude. So as far as I was concerned, all that timeline went just exactly like the flight plan said, but if you guys were ahead of yourselves, then that was probably the point at which you had to stop. Alrighty, we did P22, and let's see, P22 was on the Praetor 130 this time, and it was with half jet authority because you'd unstowed your radar antenna, and I had to deactivate 2 thrusters. Again, as far as I know, I haven't seen any of the data, but as far as I know, the P22 went just fine.
And then you maneuvered to the eggs calibration attitude.
Oh, that was nominal. All I know to say about all that stuff was just clicking along nominally. The AGS calibrate attitude held very steadily, and you guys, as far as I know, were able to get a good, or at least a leisurely AGS cal. That's about all I got there.
Okay. Undocking was, in our view, one of the things that had to be very carefully done in order to avoid getting some unmodeled delta V into the state vector from which we could never recover. The procedure that we used, which was one that was agreed on within the last week or two before flight, involved the LEM getting up both P47 and the eggs during the undocking time and zeroing the delta V's of it undocking on those. The P47 was the one that was chosen to be zeroed, and I think, as I remember, there was a little residual left in the eggs. Do you remember, Bud?
Yeah.
We went P47 to zero, but then you still had a little left in the eggs. I can't remember what it was, a tenth or 2/10.
Well, it was 3 or 4, I believe. But it jumped. This was in 470, I think. Best. And it just appeared to us that since we had P47 going, that it was probably the more accurate of the two.
After separating for a distance of 30 or 40 feet, then taking the delta V out in P47, we asked Mike to choose his own separation distance then for watching the gear, and then to stop his relative motion with respect to ours. And the intent being at that point that both vehicles then would have exactly the same state vector that they had prior to undocking. That was the intent. And
Now, any error we got in there might very well have been the reason why you guys landed long.
it's possible it contributed to that.
I don't know how much error we got in there. I did have to fire lateral thrusters several times and up and down thrusters once or twice. Now, as near as I can tell, those things should have just about compensated one for the other, but perhaps not.
It was our intention to try to keep the command module from firing any thrusters once he had killed the relative rate. We didn't quite accomplish that. He had to put a few little.
I didn't have to fire any toward you or away from you, but I had slow drifts back and forth across you and up and down while you were doing your turnaround maneuver, and I had to kill those rates. And I don't know how they developed. I don't know how they developed.
In any case, the resultant station keeping was one that was very good. The vehicles were pretty much glued together, 50 to 70 feet apart, or a little more.
A little less than 70. Well, I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark.
Probably, that's a good number. How about the inspection?
Okay, the inspection consisted really just of two things. One, a gear check, and the second, not looking for anything specific, but just looking for any obviously damaged parts or, bits of debris hanging and whatnot. And the limb looked normal to me. The gear, I could confirm 3 of the gear by actually checking the down locks. The fourth one, for some reason, I never could get into a position to check the down locks. I think it probably was in position initially for down lock inspection, but I missed it due to camera activities or something else, and then it had rotated around where I never really could check that fourth down lock. But I was relatively confident in saying all 4 of them were down and locked just by the angle which the gear itself made. So despite the fact that I only really got an accurate check on 3 out of the 4 down locks, all 4 gear were making the same angle the struts were, and I felt confident in saying that visually all 4 of them were down and locked. Photography, I took considerable 70 millimeter as well as 16 millimeter during this time. And if I'd spent more time looking out the window and less time fiddling with the cameras, I probably would have had to fire the lateral thrusters and the believe that that small amount of thruster firing really would have influenced anything as far as state vector inaccuracy is concerned. Sextant tracking, I called P20 after the separation burn. I'm not sure we've really come to the separation burn here. I guess we have undocking and separation. Separation burn, incidentally, went nominally. Brown gave me a bunch of pads. The sep burn, I think, was within 8 seconds of flight plan time. Just to give you some idea how close we were on the timeline, the pre-flight timeline. I called P20 in that little football we were in, but it was not very accurate. A slight state vector inaccuracy at that stage of the game will make considerable inaccuracy at P20, so the section was not able to track the LEM. The solo flight plan book, I've been on it now ever since a GET of around 94 hours, and in general, this solo book concept where I had all the information I needed in one book worked very well. I had no suggestions for any modifications to the book. I used the flight plan sort of as a basis for it, and then I inserted more detailed pages during the intervals when the timeline was busy. And my original intent in using that approach was that it would be less work for the people who had to make up the book if they could start with something that already existed, like the flight plan. Plus which, at any time, I could check and see what was going on inside the LEM if I had an inclination to do so. Now this format, I'm not sure it turned out to be any less work, and I never really was too concerned about what was going on inside the LEM, but it did have one great advantage which sort of accidentally fell out, and that was the detailed procedures were done by the McDonnell Douglas people, and the flight plan was done obviously by the flight plan people. And in case after case, the two did not really agree, and having them sandwiched in belly to belly with one another immediately pointed out areas where they did not agree and pinpointed them, and the two groups would then get together and find out why they did not agree, and it was a very good mechanism for making sure that all counties were heard from, and that the command module solo activities were exactly in keeping with the flight plan. So for that reason, and for none else, I recommend this particular format. Okay. Rendezvous radar and optics checks. About the only optics checks I got prior to DOI were just the fact that I could see the LEM out through the optics. P20 was not that accurate. Fuel cell purging was nominal. Update pads were good. COAS calibration, I did not calibrate the COAS. And I did not track with the COAS. Now after DOI, I did P20 tracking of the LEM, and I updated the state vector using both VHF ranging marks and sextant marks. And this is something that it was not part of the original flight plan. There was no requirement initially for the command module to track the LEM between DOI and PDI, and it was something that I had added, and I'm glad that I did, because it was a nice little practice session. Although it wasn't really required from a theoretical viewpoint, it was a nice practice session, and allowed me to see that the system was working, and to get end-to-end checks on it, and to see the marks getting incorporated, and just generally to prepare for the next day's activities when I would be marking on the LEM for real. Okay, the workload, the timeline, and the flight plan. Again, this is a fairly busy time in the command module, but these procedures were well designed, and I went through them and was able to stick with the flight plan. I did get some extensive updates from the sextant march. They were, oddly enough, all the position errors were 0, but the velocity errors, the 3 that caused excessive updates from LOI, the first I got 6.1 feet per second, the second one 7.1 feet per second, the third one 3.7 feet per second, and from then on they were all down below the threshold, which was 3 feet per second. And that's all I got there. Over to the LEM. Let's just pull one here and see what you guys are going to talk about in the LEM and where we're going to pick up the command module again, because, this is just, this really is, I've sort of gotten ahead of myself. This is really, I should be talking about this checkout through SEP, so excuse me, over to you guys.
Okay, the suiting up from my standpoint, awakening, and I've given considerable thought to the various things that I had to do and where I was going to put things and when we were going to get the LCGs out and when we were going to open them up and that sort of thing. So that I think when the time came to do this, we didn't have to do a lot of fumbling around. We knew just what to go about. There's only one exception to that, and that is our little athletic supporters. I had no idea where they were, and I thought they might have been in the same compartment with the FCSs and the LCGs, but 3 days ahead, rooting around, I didn't see them anywhere, and we debated asking the ground where the heck they were, and finally said, the heck with it, if they weren't there, why we'd get along without them. But lo and behold, they were inside the LCGs when we opened them up.
I initially commented that, as best I remembered, that's where they were stowed, but when we looked in the LCGs, we sure couldn't see them anywhere in there.
I thought those had been sealed up long ahead of time. No, not.
Yeah, that's what I remembered, but we sure couldn't prove it to ourselves there.
Well, anyway, there didn't seem to be anything that got me hung up at all, and getting a good meal. We knew that we were going to be going about 6-8 hours at least, so we had a good-sized breakfast. Took care of everything, got up about on schedule, and got suited up. Things stowed pretty well in the LEM. Mike had things well under control there. And I've been into the LEM twice before, so the entry procedure went very rapidly. We were due to go in at 9550, and I transferred the LEM power, wrote it down at 9554, so we entered the LEM right on schedule. Point this out, and we didn't get ahead. We didn't get in there an hour early or a half hour early. I think we had built up enough confidence in the activation procedure by having done this many times in the sims. I think Gene Kranz wanted to run as many of the DOI and LOI, or DOI and PDI sims, starting right from activation, and I think it was a good thing that we did do that. Many of the simulator runs, we found that we had plenty of time to go out and get a cup of coffee or make a phone call and get back in again, and so it was, having gone over this many times, that we had the confidence to go ahead and not try and jump ahead. And I think things worked out quite well. We were gradually, comfortably getting 15 to 20 minutes ahead. I had to delay the, or I elected to delay the going to the high voltage taps on activation page 19. It says to go ahead and do that if it's below, if the bus voltages are below 27, but they weren't. I don't recall the exact time in the checkout when they did begin to go below or approach 27. I think it was in the vicinity of all the circuit breaker activation when we put everything on the line. It was about that time that the voltage started going down. An example of how our time schedule went. Caution and warning checkout was to start at 96:41, and at the latter part of that is a step called primary evaporator flow 1 open. I have logged down 96:05 for opening that, so at that point we were 30 minutes roughly ahead. In the circuit breaker activation, the only funny that I observed was in putting the LCG diski circuit breaker in, we had a program alarm 520 on the diski, and 520 is radar erupt, not expected at this time, and I can't explain that. We reset it, and of course we didn't have any radar on or anything. We'll just have to see what the people say about that. I think that Neil came in just about on schedule. However, I was able to accomplish 3 or 4 headings that we were going to be doing together. I had to wait until he got in before doing the soup fan water separator check, because I think he had to be hooked up at that time. Yeah, well, at least it appeared as though it wouldn't be wise to get that one out of sequence. But I did get the glycol pump check at 97:05 out of the way and completed before Neil was in, and essentially by the time he came in, I had gotten myself just about up to the point where I was ready to go back in and put my suit on. And that got me something in the vicinity of 15, maybe 20 minutes ahead. So I knew we pretty well had it made at that point. Let's see, you did some, you did the e-memory dump, and you did some work with the diski and the alignment checks. Do you want to talk about some of those?
Okay, first, just going back for a minute to the PTA donning, we did no complete self-donning. We always used whoever else was available to help with zippers and check wherever they could. Use as much checking each other as we could, the timeline would afford. As I recall, the e-memory dump was repeated for some reason or other. I think we lost S-band or something. There was had a problem there that I can't
I'm not sure whether that
recall.
was an attitude problem or what, but we did do that again.
For some reason, we lost a high bit rate during this time period. The VHF checkout was good. Both VHF A and B between the two vehicles was good. The time And TFM initiations were without problem, and we did the docked IMU course align and the ground computed values. Now, here, the advantage of being slightly ahead showed itself in that Misfin was able to compute the torquing angles before we lost signal with them, before we were on the back side. So they could give us the torquing angles, and we torqued the platform at 97.14 about an hour before we were scheduled to do the initial torquing, which gave us better drift checks and so on, which was a help, I'm sure, in analyzing the limb platform. However, we have never done that in Sims. We've never accomplished that, so later on, I was a little confused in my own mind as to what changes that might result in, and whether we would have the subsequent torquings about an hour and a half later. At this time, I had nothing really further to do until Buzz returned with his suit on. And when he came back, essentially then we really only had to wait on Mike to get the tunnel closed up before we could continue with things like the pressure integrity checks and the regulator checks.
Yeah, it seemed to me we spent a good bit of time holding it just about that point.
Well, we were a little ahead.
You were ahead.
Yeah,
That's true. We were a little ahead, and it turned out there were very few things that we could do there, or wanted to do, felt like doing at that point.
Well, if anything, I
it seemed to
was
me we
ahead
did
again.
one thing that was kind of interesting. I just looked ahead at what was coming up, and I thought, well, gee, let me look and see what I can find out about the ags about this point. We'd already had the platform up, and it had been aligned to the command module's platform. So I went through the ags initialization update, and well, wait, I knew that we didn't have a state vector, so there wasn't any point in putting a state vector in. I was smart enough at that point to recognize that, because I knew that the state vector was coming up later. But I thought, well, gee, there's no point, there's nothing to stop me from aligning the AGS platform to the PIMS platform. And so I did this and immediately looked at the AGS ball, and it was way out in left field. It didn't any more agree to the PIMS ball at all. It took me about 5 or so minutes to try and figure out why this was. I knew that we were going to come up to this point a little bit later on. I finally realized that the reason for it was that the PIMS didn't have a refs mat, and its computer didn't know where its platform was. Even though the platform was in the right spot, it didn't have any reference system, so it couldn't tell the AGS what its platform ought to be. The AGS platform is always in terms of the command module orbit plane. Since the things didn't know this, why it just came up with some garbage. But this caused just a little bit of concern, because we were quite anxious to have the AGS with us for the whole flight. Beginning to wonder whether we would or not at that point.
Hey, ascent battery activation. Any problems there? Yeah, they got folded too.
Yeah. No. You just kind of hate to bring the ascent batteries on the line. You've got a system going, and then turn off all the descent batteries just to prove that the ascent batteries are working. And it just seemed to me that you had no backup. If when you went through and dead faced and turned off all the batteries, if at that point everything went dark in there, why maybe that wasn't the only way you could go about checking out to see that the ascent batteries work. But of course, that worked out all right. The pressure integrity check held with the suit loop decreasing, maybe 0.1, something like that. I think there's a little lag in it when you first close the regulators. The tolerance that's called out is 0.3, and it wasn't anywhere near that. Wasn't any significant change going to secondary canister. Regulator check is a fairly involved set of valve switching that you're doing, and there's some question in my mind to whether I'm sure all of these things are nice to do, but unless you have an extremely intimate knowledge of exactly what you're doing, if you run into some problem in there, the fact that you're doing this one step right after another puts you in a non-nominal situation. And I would much prefer that this sort of a check be done on the earth side where you have calm, because you're dumping the cabin pressure down and you're using the repress valve. I think the ground would agree with that too. So if in other flights that could be worked into the earth side pass, I think it would be beneficial. Don't you think that?
I agree with that, although I think the pressure integrity check is relatively straightforward.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But these two are coupled together because of their nature.
And it's tied to the tracking.
Yeah.
Well, it was tied to the tunnel closeout.
Tied to the tunnel.
Let's see, there was one funny that I don't think we've mentioned to anyone. It was pretty minor, but there was one of the strokes on the data that was not illuminated. You know, each character is made up of all these different strokes. And the one that was missing was in the middle character. And it would leave you in a position where you couldn't tell whether it was a 3 or a 9. I didn't realize at the time that there was any room for confusion, but later in looking at some numbers, you could not really tell whether in fact that was a 3 or a 9. That sound right? Yeah, you just need that one stroke to close it and it becomes a 9.
How about the bottom one?
4 or 9. I can't remember.
Well, anyway, there was a region where, with this particular one missing, there was reason for some doubt as to exactly what you had.
That's true
What
of a
anything
lot
that-
of any digit on any of those electrical digit displays.
I mean,
Whenever you
I
get-
had one of those in the EMS, remember?
Yeah, that's right. Fortunately, the simulators usually got some out, and you get used to putting up with that, but it's a problem that really could get to you sometime if you misinterpreted a number.
The S-band antenna seemed to work very well at this stage. It didn't make quite as much noise as I had anticipated.
But it's noticeable.
The glycol pump sure made a lot of noise. See, we missed the AGS, putting the AGS time in there, we missed by 15 centiseconds, hitting it right on, which I thought was fairly close. However, we did even better than that when we updated it to 120 hours.
Okay?
The,
See, in Ordeal, as we set up the Ordeal, we got back to our favorite argument is what is right to set in the Ordeal, the eggs or the pings, when you're at a non-zero yaw. And I guess we believed that it was the eggs that was right, and we set that in, and it turned out it was right.
yeah.
And the pings was wrong by about
I was
60.
hoping you were going to say that.
By about
No,
40 degrees or something like that.
something
Things was wrong by 40
yeah,
degrees.
Quite a bit, significant amount.
That's an interesting one because you can get either answer depending on who you ask. I think still today. We proved to ourselves at least that the eggs was the correct one. Landing gear went down very nicely. No problem with the landing gear. No question about that one.
We were expecting the two distinct sounds, but really, I mean, they weren't identical sounds. You could hear the pyros fire, and then it was just a short time after that, it was not as much a sound as it was a vibration transmitted up that indicated that in fact something had locked down. Of course, we had no way of knowing how many of them had done that. When we did fire the, so we used, we opened up Logic Power A when we fired them, and then we closed Logic Power A and fired again. And at this time, we heard a click.
Like a relay.
Just like a relay going. But
Nothing
no
else.
pyros fired. Now, how about the gimbal trim?
We did not drive the gimbal. Some question there while we waited for confirmation
Yes.
from the ground that they had proper gimbal positions and that we did not have to drive. RCS pressurization and checkout. I recall no problems there.
The Parker valves and the talkbacks gave us some rather funny responses. From Gene's comments, he had indicated that when you activate one of the quad pairs or main shutoff valve to a particular position, that it didn't go to that new position until you released it. Now, the simulator, when for most of our training, when you'd move that valve, as soon as you'd get it to the spring-loaded position of open or closed, it would change. and it would stay changed when you would release it back to the center. Well, his comment was that it didn't work that way, that when you moved it, it didn't go to this new position until you released it. So we changed the simulator. Well, we found something even further than that. And let me see if I got it right. The ascent feed ones were open and the twos were closed. All of them were barber pole, as you expect. But then part of this procedure, after pressurizing, was to go through and cycle each valve to its present position, where it should be. So I went to the ascent feed ones and went open, and nothing changed. They stayed barber pole. As soon as I went to number 2 to put them to the closed position, which would put them barber pole, they both went gray. And they went to the opposite position that you would expect. When I released it, then it went back to barber pole again. And I think the same thing happened to the shutoff valves, that when you move it to the closed position, where it should go barber pole, well, it would go gray, and then as you release it, it'd go to its present position. What I'm really ended up saying is that you can't tell the position of the valve until you release it. As a matter of fact, it'll give you the opposite indication in some cases. We had good helium pressure and read that out to misspin. Went through the RCS checkout. We had one quad pair, the upper right hand one that stuck 2 different times in the red indication.
I think that's 4 Bravo, I believe.
Yeah, right. When we started going through this coal fire, we were getting all different stories from people on the ground as to whether these talkbacks would go red. And the final one that I got from Dale was, the latest story is they won't go red on you. Well, they all went red. First 4 of them, then all of them went red. And it's a very bright colored red, I might add. Much,
Doesn't look like the simulator.
it really stands out much more than the simulator. We've got the numbers of what we read on a disky when we went to the soft stops, and for the most part they agreed precisely. There were a couple of them that missed by 1 last digit, but we were told that that was not significant.
Rendezvous radar and self-check.
Everything went just as expected. I've got numbers written down here, but I don't think it's any point, since they were all within limits. Just as we were briefed on, the tape meter was 2 feet per second less than the disky as far as the range rate readout went.
And the Gibbs pressurization and checkout went as expected.
Yeah, let's see, the Ag's cow attitude, I've got angles written down here. Mike maneuvered to the angles, and we're steady as a rock for a good long time period, more than adequate time period to perform the check.
And I'd always wondered if there was anything that you could do during the eggs cow period, that 5-minute period, that would maybe give a little jolt to the eggs and give you an erroneous reading so you wouldn't pass. In any case, we just avoided that problem by not doing anything except the eggs cal, during the eggs cal. We didn't pressurize the dips or put down the landing gear or run the rendezvous radar or any of those things which might put a little oscillation into the spacecraft and trigger an accelerometer or something so that it might read out when we just let it run all by itself.
Well, the dip pressurization sounds like a big thing, but really it took about 2 minutes to do.
Yeah.
And we went through the final circuit breaker verification. Cards worked quite well. We'd lose maybe a little bit of time by having to pass them back and forth, so one person would check his circuit breaker panel and then get it back over to the others, but I don't think that's too significant. Okay, that ends us with the activation.
Brings us to undocking, which was very smooth. You have very good visual. See that? Always tell where the command module was by looking out the window. We've commented on our concern about the manner in which the undocking was controlled, and I think there's probably still room for improvement on that procedure. One that was discussed before flight was to extend the probe and not release the capture latches till its extension. Then release the capture latches. Essentially, you have no velocity between the vehicles, and then the command module really wouldn't move at all at the time you flew away and wouldn't compromise the state vector in any way. And we thought that might be a very good way to do things, but we just didn't feel that there was enough time before launch to look into the second order effects you might get out of doing something like that, so we chose to go with the way that the undockings had been performed previously. That may be something that future flights might want to look into with more care than we were able to.
Putting helmets and gloves on and off didn't seem to really be much of a bother. We put them on for the integrity check, took them back off again, put them back on for undocking and took them off. A little piece of Velcro on the feed port worked quite well, just slapping it down on the SN engine cover. See, I put my gloves over by the right-hand controller. You could put them in the helmet just as well. The verification of about 8 to 10 AGS addresses that is covered at a point just before separation. I was able to get that done before undocking. There's just a vast amount of data that the ground reads up to you in that time period. All the DOI, PDI plus 12 pads and various loads that are coming up. You have to really devote one man to just copying all those things down, and it seemed like it took forever to get them all done. And even after we got those, we still had some more coming up after DOI. The surface pad had to come up then.
The formation flying was considerably less difficult than in our simulation would lead us to believe. We were able to maintain position with respect to the other vehicle with a good deal less trouble than we could in simulations and with less use of fuel. At the time of separation, we thought we had our relative velocity nulled to less than 1/10 of a foot per second in all axes based on the amount of and size of translational inputs required to maintain a constant position over the past 10 or 15 minutes before separation.
It might not be too obvious to some people that we did add, what was it, 20 degrees to our pitch attitude after undocking so that we get better high gain during the yaw maneuver. That I think is peculiar with the particular landing site. But we were able to get high gain lock on. Matter of fact, I could have gotten it before we made the pitch maneuver, but it didn't look like there was too much point in doing that. But as soon as we finished the pitch, we had high gain lock on, and we had it throughout the yaw maneuver. I was going to take some pictures with a 16 millimeter camera mounted on the bracket, but it looked like it was canted off to the side, so I elected to hand hold the camera for a few sequences during the right after the pitch maneuver before we did the 360 yaw. You want to comment at all on the ags? Using the ags for this versus the frames? What are they? See, we made a change from max dead band to min dead band, and I think that still seems to me like it.
Yes, we
Might be an open area.
flew this area of the flight plan in eggs, attitude hold, min dead band, and pulse in the axis that we were maneuvering in. Getting back to separation, I want to mention that the separation attitude was not the attitude in which we had expected to be in as a result of some changes to the femoris at this point. In other words, Mike was separating on the local vertical, but that was not at the same inertial pitch angle that we expected it to be at. It was off by about 10 degrees, as I
Did you get an
recall.
updated attitude per se that was different from undocking?
Let's see here.
Or time?
No, set, as I said before, was with about 8 seconds of the flight plan, right? Let me go back.
Remember you saying
Either the
that
time or the attitude was different, and you did go separate on the local vertical, but the
was
pitch
that-
attitude that we were at was about 10 degrees different.
Was that
And it
because
took me
we
a
were
while to
looking at
figure that out.
inertial versus ordeal? Was that-
It was a different attitude. It was a 7-degree different
Yeah,
attitude.
okay.
It was pitch 007 instead of pitch 014.
Okay, and that reflected a different attitude for us, and I was holding in the attitude that was on our timeline, and sure enough, didn't look like you were in the right attitude. And then we
7
recognized
degrees
that some changes had occurred here as a result of the orbit that we were in that we had not properly understood here pre-launch, or else some changes had occurred after launch that we didn't properly appreciate. In any case, 285 is what we expected to be. That wasn't the right number.
What was the right number? It should be 7 degrees off that. Did you write it down?
I don't have my time on there, but that's about right. 7 degrees different. Okay. That was important to know because it was the thing that made the COAS point at you and allowed me to check lateral translations during the formation plan and during your separation. Immediately after this, we did the landing radar test right after your separation, and that went well, as I remember, as advertised, right?
Yeah. Data book. Yeah, they were right on.
And after that, we did our first alignment in the limb, fine line P52, option 3. Did that on the pre-flight plan stars, Acrux and
25 to 33.
Antares.
Yeah.
And the torquing angles were about 0.3 of a degree.
Yeah, they sure weren't ones that instilled a lot of confidence in me. This was the last alignment we're going to have, and we changed what we had by 0.3 of a degree. And I guess that's to be expected, but I was sure hoping to have smaller ones than that, because this indicated the kind of drift we had from the last alignment that was from the command module, and it was my understanding that these alignments were quite good. A little bit better than these torquing angles would indicate. So we probably ought to discuss that further.
We'll be interested in finding out what the drifts were there, or whether that was just an inability to calculate any biases and put them into the computer so that you could improve the platform up to what we normally would expect from a platform.
See, we had a manual locked on with the radar before we did this, right?
Oh, yeah.
We had P20 standing by, but we didn't use it.
Did a manual lock on, and our radar needles and coas agreed very well. See, guess that was your first chance to look at the transponder and all that stuff in operation.
Yeah, I recall I gave you some ranges. I didn't write them down.
Yes, you did. And they agreed with our values very closely.
And they agreed with my state vector. I just wrote down one value fairly closely. When I had you at 0.72 miles on the VHF ranging, my state vector said you were at 0.62, which is fairly close.
Did we get that alignment finished? Seemed to me it took a little bit longer.
Yeah, we took 5 marks on each star, and it did take us quite a while. And
Yeah, I don't think we can emphasize more to other people that allow lots of time in their timelines for doing the alignments.
we'll have a good bit more say about the after insertion alignment, which had more funnies about it. And I think that's about all for tonight.
We made a practice early in our training of leaving these TTCA switches disabled as much as possible, and the direct coils, active 4-jet. I'm not sure that everyone really understands why you do that, but it's a good sound thing, I think, to keep as many hand controllers out of the loop as you can. It makes any troubleshooting far easier, and it minimizes the number of problems you can get into. And I still see that a lot of procedures come up and have all these things armed and everything, and we just went about shutting them all off.
Yeah, it's just a basic difference in philosophy. Most of our training, most of our directorate takes the viewpoint that you leave everything on. And essentially everything is hot all the time. And we took just the opposite. Namely, we turned all the things off that we didn't think were contributing, particularly in the control system, and just isolated that many more possible failures from causing us difficulties en route. Now that's just a philosophical thing, and not everybody agrees to that kind of approach.
For the same thing in the command module, in that we used hand controller number 1 just strictly as a spare. We never powered it up. They left it alone and always used number 2.
But a lot of people didn't understand why in our procedures all this stuff came on about disabling this and disabling this switch and that switch and the other one, and it was really just a matter of preventing failures from getting to us in critical times. I think that's all for tonight.